She was 22 years old. She was described by survivors as one of the most beautiful women they had ever seen. And on the morning of December 13th, 1945, she walked to the gallows in Hamelin Prison and spoke only one word. Schnell. Quickly, that was Irma Grese, a woman who supervised the murder of thousands, a woman who chose her victims based on jealousy, a woman who starved her own dogs so they would tear human flesh with more hunger, and a woman who, when she finally faced justice, laughed in a courtroom while survivors described what she had done to them. This is not just a story about one woman. This is a story about what happens when a system hands absolute power to someone who was already broken, and what justice looks like when the world finally says enough. If you're new here, welcome to Incredible War History, another channel that doesn't look away from the hard chapters of history. Hit subscribe right now and turn on the bell notification. We cover the stories most channels are afraid to tell, and this one is one of the most disturbing and important we've ever produced. Stay with us until the end. September 1st, 1939. Nazi Germany invades Poland. World War II begins. Within months, the Nazis establish Auschwitz, a concentration camp complex built on occupied Polish soil, roughly 60 kilometers west of Krakow. What began as an overflow prison for Polish political detainees would evolve into the largest killing machine in human history. By October 1941, construction begins on Birkenau, the expansion that would become the heart of the extermination program. From 1942 onward, near Auschwitz-Birkenau becomes the primary site for the Nazi genocide of European Jews. Approximately 1 million people would die there, roughly 90% of all Auschwitz victims. Into this world in March 1943, a 19-year-old German woman arrives as a guard. Her name, Irma Grese. Irmgard Ilse Ida Grese was born on October 7, 1923, in Brechen, Germany, a small, quiet dairy farming community in the Weimar Republic. She was the third of 5 children. Her parents, Berta and Alfred Grese, worked as dairy laborers. There was nothing in her birth that foretold what she would become. When Adolf Hitler seized power in January 1933, Irma was 9 years old. Her father, Alfred, was no Nazi sympathizer, a devout Christian and a strict man. Either Alfred Grese refused to allow his children to join Hitler Youth organizations, a decision that put the family at odds with the rising tide of National Socialism sweeping Germany. Then, in January 1936, the family shattered. Irma's mother, Berta, drank hydrochloric acid and died. She had discovered her husband's affair with a local pub owner's daughter. Irma was 12 years old. Her mother was 33. That act of violence, committed not by an enemy but by a parent, inside the walls of her own home, would leave a mark on Irma that investigators and psychologists would later examine for decades. After her mother's death, Alfred Grese raised his children alone. He was strict, physically disciplinarian, and cold. Irma struggled in school. Her sister Helene later recalled that Irma was badly bullied, and when confrontations arose, Irma did not fight back. She ran. She dropped out at 14. She worked at a dairy factory. She worked in a retail shop. In 1939, at 15, she found work as an assistant nurse at the Hohenlichen Sanatorium, where she was mentored by Karl Gebhardt, a name that would resurface in one of the most disturbing chapters of Nazi medical history. Irma wanted to become a full nurse, but her academic performance blocked the path. In 1941, she was redirected to a dairy farm. Then in July 1942, at 18 years old, she was deployed as a guard at Ravensbrück, the only major concentration camp established specifically for women. At Ravensbrück, something changed in Irma Grese, or perhaps something that was always there was given permission to emerge. SS medical doctors at Ravensbrück were conducting brutal experiments on female prisoners. Legs were broken with hammers. Wounds were deliberately infected with bacteria. Bones were transplanted without anesthesia. The medical supervisor coordinating these experiments was Karl Gebhardt, Irma's own former mentor from Hohenlichen. Investigators later theorized that Irma served as a nurse's assistant during these experiments, present as women screamed and bled and died without pain relief. Whether it normalized cruelty or accelerated something already fractured within her, no one can say for certain. What is certain is what she became afterward. When she returned home in early 1943 and told her father she was supervising female prisoners at Ravensbrück, Alfred Grese took a belt and beat her. He forbade her from ever coming home again. 1 month later, Irma Grese arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau. Survivor Nina Kaleska, when then just 16 years old, remembered the first time she saw Irma Grese. "I've never seen anyone more beautiful. She was like a vision." Dr. Gisela Perl, a physician and Auschwitz survivor, went further. Her body was perfect in every line, her face clear and angelic, her blue eyes the most innocent eyes one can imagine. And yet Irma Grese was the most depraved, cruel, imaginative pervert I ever came across. That contradiction, beauty masking absolute brutality, was what made Irma Grese so uniquely terrifying. Prisoners couldn't reconcile what they saw with what they experienced. Masha Greenbaum described it simply. "When we saw her, we used to run, just run, because when she met you, she kicked you to the floor. She went to the neck with her boots. She killed people like that. She carried a woven leather whip covered in cellophane, so that blood could be easily wiped clean. She described it herself at trial. It was translucent, like white glass. It was a very light whip, but if I hit someone with it, it would hurt. She hit people, constantly, for being hungry, for arriving late to roll call, for looking at her, for existing." In May 1944, at just 20 years old, Irma Grese was appointed senior guard of Birkenau's Camp C, a section that held between 20,000 and 30,000 female prisoners, the majority of them Hungarian Jews deported as part of a mass deportation operation that removed 424,000 people from Hungary in just 8 weeks. The blocks in Camp C were designed for no more than 300 prisoners. Grese packed 1,000 into each one. There were no beds in most blocks. Our sanitary systems had collapsed. The latrines had ceased to function. Grese herself later described it at trial, not with horror, but with contempt for the prisoners. She stood at the gate each morning as work parties departed and each evening as they returned. And she beat inmates with her whip as they passed, for no reason other than because she could. Commandant Joseph Kramer, her own lover, eventually told her to stop. She didn't stop. Survivor Margaret Jastrow Klug recalled the day she glanced at an SS soldier who had placed sunglasses on his dog and laughed at the absurdity. Grese saw her smile and struck her with such force she lost 3 teeth on the spot. Grese participated regularly in the selections, the process where arriving prisoners were separated into those who would work and those who would be sent directly to the gas chambers. She conducted these selections alongside SS Dr. Josef Mengele. Holocaust survivor Alice Kahana recalled, "When Grese and Mengele appeared, it was terror and fear. It always meant death. The way Irma Grese looked and walked made us all feel that we are less than animals." Grese had 2 large dogs that she deliberately kept half-starved. Survivor testimony described Grese riding her bicycle alongside columns of female prisoners on 16-kilometer work marches. And when women fell behind, she unleashed the dogs. One survivor testified about the day a wagon of stones tipped and scattered, and Grese responded by setting her dogs on the women who had been pulling it. The dogs were tearing at the girls' bodies. Irma came closer to observe what they were doing. Her eyes were bloodshot. The sight of blood seemed to intoxicate her. All this time, Irma Grese had a smile on her face. Guard Helen Copper estimated that Grese was responsible for at least 30 deaths per day from her orders alone, often forcing prisoners to step outside the wire fence to make it appear they were attempting to escape, giving guards legal cover to shoot them. Copper stated it was her own assigned duty, ordered by Grese, to count the dead each day and load bodies into railway wagons. On January 18, 1945, Soviet forces approached Auschwitz. When the SS began the evacuation, forcing prisoners on death marches through the frozen Polish winter, Grese accompanied one of these columns west, first to Ravensbrück, then to Bergen-Belsen, where she arrived in March 1945. Bergen-Belsen in early 1945 was a catastrophe. Starvation, typhus, daily rations of watery turnip soup, and 3.5 centimeters of bread. Between 250 and 300 prisoners were dying every single day. Survivor Dita Kraus described seeing groups of women crouched around a pot in which they had cooked a human liver because they had nothing else. Irma Grese requested to stay at Bergen-Belsen because her lover, Franz Wolfgang Hatzinger, was stationed there. She continued beating prisoners. She compelled starving women to perform exhausting physical exercises, what she called making sport, while she herself was fed. 2 weeks before British liberation, a witness named Saffron watched Gracie beat a girl with a riding crop. The beatings were very severe. If they were not the cause of death, they were not called severe. On April 15, 1945, British forces liberated Bergen-Belsen. 2 days later, Irma Grese was arrested. British forces forced former SS camp personnel, including Grese, to bury the 13,000 decomposing bodies lying across the campgrounds, without gloves, without protection, under constant supervision. Within 2 months, 17 SS staff members had died of typhus from handling the bodies. Among them, Franz Wolfgang Hatzinger, Irma's lover, dead of typhus on April 23, 1945, just 6 days after her arrest. The Belsen trial began on September 17, 1945 in Lüneburg. 44 defendants, 45 days of testimony. Irma Grese sat in the dock and twice broke into uncontrollable laughter during proceedings. When witness after witness described her brutality, she responded that they were lying, exaggerating, making an elephant out of a small fly. Eventually, she partially broke. She admitted to the beatings. She denied any killings. Her courtroom statement became one of the most chilling documents from any Nazi war crimes trial. If prisoners had their faces slapped, it was only their fault. If they were more intelligent, they obeyed orders. She cried once, not for her victims. She cried when her sister described their childhood home, and when her 23-year-old brother Alfred entered the courtroom, twice wounded from fighting on the Eastern Front. For the dead, she showed nothing. On November 17, 1945, the British military tribunal sentenced Irma Grese to death. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery rejected all clemency appeals. On the morning of December 13, 1945, at Hamelin Prison, Irma Grese walked to the gallows. She had been heard singing Nazi songs in her cell the night before. British executioner Albert Pierre Point was waiting. Her final word, Schnell. Quickly. She was 22 years old, the youngest woman executed under British law in the 20th century. History doesn't forget, it doesn't forgive, and it doesn't look away no matter how uncomfortable the truth is. That is exactly why channels like Incredible War History exist, because forgetting these stories is the first step toward repeating them. If this video gave you something, a question, a chill, a reason to learn more, then do one thing right now. Hit subscribe. Leave a comment below telling us which part of this story shocked you most, and share this video with someone who needs to understand this history. We have more stories like this one coming. Stories that will make you think, make you uncomfortable, and make you understand why history matters. We'll see you in the next one on Incredible War History.